All right. Hope you're all doing great today. We will talk today about the evolution of Linux distros for gaming over the past 3 years, mostly between 2018 to 2022. And to do that, we're actually going to use data from ProtonDB. So in case you are not familiar with Linux gaming, just give you a quick introduction. ProtonDB is an online application that tracks which games are working well on Linux with Proton. Proton is a compatibility layer that enables Windows games that are basically not made to run on Linux to run on Linux on Steam. And what it looks like is that typically you use your Steam Linux clients and you install a game that's made for Windows and will warn you, are you sure you want to use Proton to run this game? And then if everything goes well, you will basically be able to run the game just like you would be running on Windows. You would not see much difference. Sometimes you would see some loss in performance, but most of the time you will see almost like a transparent operation. So it will be very seamless for the end user. And ProtonDB is a service that tracks basically users' reports that are saying, okay, I tried this game is working, or this game is actually blocked, it doesn't work, it crashes, or it's something that's glitching somehow. And so it's very useful to find out whether you can purchase this game on Windows before you do so, and to make sure it's actually supported. Now, what's interesting about the ProtonDB reports is that they are available as open database formats. So you can actually download the latest reports and merge them with the ancient ones as well. And you can also take a look at what people are using in terms of distributions whenever they are submitting their reports. So you have actually this whole landscape of information about what people were using for each report. And you can see over time what kind of distributions or hardware they were using. Today we'll be focusing on distributions, and this is what it looks like. If you plot the choice of distributions among all the reports on ProtonDB for the past 3 years, this is mostly what it looks like. And the first thing that goes, that's pretty obvious when you start seeing that, is that there's a major change going on. Ubuntu, which was the biggest distribution that was used for many things, including gaming before, has actually shrunk almost like by a factor of 2 over that period. Used to be like 43% plus, is now less than 20% in the latest month, which is a very drastic reduction in usage. You can see there are distributions that are gaining at the same time. Arch has been a fairly solid distribution, hovering about 15-16% for the past few, I would say, year and a half, and now it's clearly a solid 20%. Manjaro was also pretty much the same size as Arch, and now it's slightly smaller according to the latest reports, but pretty much similar in terms of overall, I would say, sizing. And there's the newcomers, I would say. The things like PopOS. PopOS is actually based on Ubuntu, but it's kind of a more polished version of Ubuntu. They change a lot of things. They try to make it more user-friendly as well. They typically include directly driver support for NVIDIA or these kind of things. So that's it's actually a lot easier for newcomers to get started and to have things working in less time. And you can see PopOS was almost nothing back a few years ago, and started progressively to have a following. And with the word of mouth, with the push that System 76 were actually developing this kind of fork of Ubuntu on top of making laptops for Linux. They have been clearly communicating, this is how we do things, this is why we do things this way, and so on. And they have been making some great progress. You can see they're actually now much larger than they were before. They basically 3 times more people seems to be using them nowadays than before, more or less. So which is a great progression. And then there's the kind of opposite happening with Mint. Linux Mint used to be actually something very similar to PopOS in a way, as in it's a more polished version of Ubuntu that you would recommend typically to a beginner, because it's mostly Ubuntu with less bugs, with slightly better interface or better support, and therefore it's kind of easier to get started. And it has followed a kind of a downward trend at the same time as PopOS has been popping up, I would say. And maybe there's some kind of people actually switching from Mint to PopOS, or it's going to be maybe several kind of interaction happening at the same time, which leads to Mint being slightly minor player, while PopOS is growing at the same time. Endeavor is a Arch-based Linux distribution, and it's been growing steadily over the past year and a half. It used to be very, very small. Now it starts to have a following, and maybe it will be sustainable at some point. Garuda is another Arch-based distribution, and it's fairly recent. It was really nothing like maybe a year ago, and then you can see it's now progressively getting some more user base. Debian is not a distribution that typically you would use for gaming, but it's been there forever, and it's still a small following, but it definitely seems to be getting slower in the past few months. Fedora is a kind of hard to understand how small this is here. We definitely expect Fedora to be larger than that typically. It's one of the major, I would say, distribution on the market. It should be bigger than a few percent, but this shows you that this data is definitely biased in one way or another. I'm thinking that those people who submit reports who actually test a lot of games and spend time to write reports and to share that with other people are definitely some kind of different demographics than the regular, maybe average Linux gamer. Those are probably very close to being early adopters, tinkerers, and basically testers, I would say. And this may not be representative of the Linux market at large, or the Linux gaming market at large, but this is definitely, I think, showing where things will be moving at some point. And I'm expecting Arch to keep growing, even among the less early adopters users. Ubuntu to keep losing some mind share and also some actual share. And you would see also PopOS, I would expect to grow further as well. We can also compare whether the data is consistent with what we've seen before. We had a survey that we conducted mainly through Reddit, and the subreddits, I would say, in early 2021. And this is the result at the time. And you can see that the subreddits are definitely very much leaning towards Arch Linux or Manjaro users. Ubuntu is even smaller. PopOS is actually pretty big there. And Linux Mint is actually smaller than PopOS. So what this tells you is that those numbers are probably quite different from the ones you've seen in ProtonDB. But somehow I would say the order / proportion and it kind of looks similar in a way. Like Mint is smaller than PopOS. Fedora seems to be smaller than PopOS as well. Ubuntu is definitely losing some share versus the Arch Linux distribution. So you would expect to see some consistency, at least in the overall trends, while the numbers, of course, are going to be up and down depending on who you survey, how you survey, and where you get the data from. Now, if you want to have a more, I would say, closer picture of the typical Linux gamer out there, you can go to the Steam hardware survey. And what do we see here? This is some December 2021 data, and you can see that Ubuntu is actually the first distribution, and if you add the two versions of Ubuntu, they're almost like 25% of the market, maybe slightly less than that, but very close to that. But Manjaro and Arch actually are very much the same size, which is consistent with what we've seen in other surveys. And they're basically second position. So they're not too far behind Ubuntu, even though they're much smaller at this stage, but combined actually pretty close to Ubuntu altogether. And this is on a very large population of people who've been using Linux for gaming via Steam, which could be very, very different kind of gamer, not early adopters only. We also see that Linux Mint is definitely relatively small, and PopOS is actually popping up there, very close to Linux Mint. So I'd wager that in the next year, you would see PopOS getting even more popularity, Ubuntu losing share, and Arch / Manjaro progressively gaining more and more percentages over time. We'll see that happens. I'm predicting that what we see happening among early adopters will trickle down to more median, I would say, Linux gamer. We also saw that Valve has been using Arch as a distribution of choice for the Steam Deck, which is not by random choice. And we should expect Arch to be gaining, or Arch, I would say, driven system to be gaining more popularity in the future. Because, this rolling distro release, and it makes things really practical for hardware support and drivers and everything that goes with modern package with it. So it makes a lot of sense to be on this kind of distribution if you want to have the latest hardware or the latest features supported. And I would say that was mostly it for today. As you can see, things are changing very quickly in the Linux gaming markets, and there's no sign of it stopping. And actually, I was pretty surprised to see that even recent distributions managed to find a somewhat large public, even though they didn't exist like almost 3 years ago. So which is very encouraging. If you want to change things, if you have good ideas, you can actually have a foothold in these markets. You can actually make a difference, and you can find your users. So all the power to you if you're a distro developer. Now, if you like this video and you'd like to see more of that, please support us on Patreon or LiberaPay. You have the links under this video. And that'll be all for today, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks a lot.